Well, if you happen to be joining us today for the first time, I have to tell you that this camp meeting series we've been spending in the home. We've been wandering around from room to room, trying to learn lessons from our physical house about living in our emotional relationships. We began in the kitchen, the heart of the home, where we find our nurture. We talked about commitment being the heart of the emotional family. And then last week, we moved to the place we'd probably rather not have moved to, the garage. And we talked about all the stuff there in the garage that needs to be dealt with, that needs to be cleaned. And now today, before we leave the garage, maybe I ought to share a couple of items that were sent my way by different ones of you after considering that process of cleaning the garage. Early in the week, I got this email from one of our church members, Lynn Heath. Here's what Lynn wrote to me. He said, "Randy, I cleaned my garage today. It is spotless and it was easy. I just moved all the stuff into the storage shed." Lynn. Well, that's one way to approach it. But what if you don't have a storage shed? Well, maybe what you ought to do is buy one of the decals. A company sells decals. Penny Miller sent these my way. A company sells decals it can cover the entire garage door. Look at this guy putting a decal on. Spotless garage, a convertible Beamer. How much better does it get? You'll be the envy of all your neighbors. Or maybe you say, well, that's nice, but that's not what I want. I want kids around my house, so try this decal. That'll bring them out. Or maybe you live in a quiet Adventist neighborhood, and you want to kind of stir things up a little bit. How about this one? Have a wine cellar in your garage. That'll stir them up. That'll get the tongues to wagging. But if you're worried about the tongues wagging too much and you want to keep people at bay, maybe you ought to put this decal on your garage door. That'll keep them away. And then finally, if you decide, I know those people out there are talking about me in the neighborhood. I know they are. They're gossiping. And I'd like to find out why, or I'd like to at least keep them quiet. Put this decal on your garage door, a little SR-71 reconnaissance plane. Just fly that around a little bit. You'll know all that's being said, and they'll be quiet. And in the process, it'll take care of the garage. Garage checked off the list. But that was last week. This week, we move out of the garage, and we move to the front porch. Now, I've talked with you enough over the years to know that much of my growing up life, many of my growing up years were spent outside of this country. But there was a window of time, about 2.5 years long, when we moved back to this country, back to Texas, and we lived there. I was in elementary school at the time. As I think back to those years in elementary school in this country, there is something clear that I remember about our house. Our house had a front porch. And on the front porch was a front porch swing. We could sit and rock in that swing. We could talk to each other, long, slow conversations. And we could watch what was happening in the entire neighborhood. And you know what was happening? Life was happening. Back in that day and time, life was lived in the front yard, the front porch, the street out in front of the house. In fact, I can remember that street. It was asphalt. It was hard street. But my friend Mark and me, Mark lived across the street from us. We used to play football out there. I can't tell you how many Super Bowls we won out there in the street in front of our house. Or what about John from down the street and Trent right across the street from him, who would gather up the neighborhood kids and we'd play tag or hide and seek, and the hours would pass. Or even Craig from well up the street. He'd come down with his long hair and his good arm. He would play quarterback. We'd move from the street into the yard, and then we'd play tackle football. Still remember the day Craig got tackled on the driveway and went home with a broken elbow. Can you imagine? Started early. That was what was happening out in the front street, out in the front yard, on the front porch. That was life. But that wasn't all. As I thought about that house this week, and I thought about walking out the front door, and I thought about who lived there, I remembered. If you'd walked out our front door and turned to the right, the house immediately to the right, that was where the Richardsons lived. Mr. Richardson, Elder Richardson, was a teacher in theology at the school there. We must have thought he was one of us because he came out and played with us a lot. In fact, his wife told me years later, she said, one day you came and knocked on our door, I answered the door, and you looked up at me and said, can he come out and play? You thought he was one of the kids. Well, that was the house just to the right. 2 houses to the right was the Christman family. Very musical family, 4 sons. In fact, one of their sons, named Bob, grew up to be mayor of a city called Loma Linda, California. Or if you had walked out the front door and turned to the left, the Flowers lived right next door to us, had rich St. Augustine grass. I don't know what possessed me one day. I was mowing our lawn. Maybe it was out of rebellion, out of having to mow our lawn. But I mowed part of theirs. Just 2 swipes across in their lawn, really short. They were not pleased. If you had gone one more to the left, there was the Von Hoff family, Trent. Their family had a pool. We got to be friends with Trent. Or what about across the street? McLean's in front of us, the Sullivans to the right, the Hineses up, and all the way up is where Craig Hunt lived. That was our neighborhood. I knew them. That was where life happened. We were community. Well, I got to thinking as I thought of that, thinking about that place and that experience and my house and my experience now. I don't have much time to drink lemonade, and we don't really have much of a front porch where we sit and talk. Well, that's good stuff. You want some? So I got to thinking, I wonder how many people I know. Well, I know across the street, Brandon lives there. Not sure of the names of the rest of the family. To the left, that's where Ken and April live. Their boy loves to play basketball. Up the street, Taylor and his family, don't know their last name. Right to our left, Ken, he lives there, don't know his last name. In fact, as I got to thinking about it, I realized I really don't know a lot of these people very well. Well, there is one. On the route that I walk or jog or ride the bike, exercise the dog, there is one friend I have. His name is Kenny. Kenny lives a lot out in the front yard. Early morning, I'll go by. He's already up, getting ready to go to work. He always comes out and greets me and talks. His dearly beloved Denise is there. She's just as friendly, but I don't see her as often. Kenny talks with all the people that walk by. As we entered into conversation now, a couple of years or so ago, he asked me what I did, and I told him. Since that time, when he comes out and talks, he'll say things like, would you add my friend's father to your church's prayer list? He fell from a ladder this week. It's really serious. Or a few Sabbath mornings back, early in the morning, I was out and surprised to see him out. As I walked by, he called out to me and said, hey, I hear there's a church in Loma Linda today where they're going to have a really good sermon. You might want to go. I love Kenny. Great guy. But there aren't too many Kennys, and I'm not sure I'm one of them. So I wonder about your house. What's it like at your place? If you walk out the front door, do you know who lives out there? Left, right, ahead? Or what about this question? Does life happen out front? I can tell you the difference between the house I pictured of my childhood and the home where we now live is that life doesn't happen on the front porch or in the front yard or even in the front street. It's not a matter of architecture or design. It's something different. Life has moved into the backyard. Now it happens in the backyard, and it happens behind fences where people's lives can't intersect, can't touch. We've lost a lot of community. I got to wondering what that means for this family we call church. Church. Does this church have a large front porch? You think it does? It's an important question to ask in a day and age of increasing cutoffs in families, of increasing and deepening loneliness in people, of fractured friendships and ruptured relationships. It's an important question to ask. What about in a day and age when there are more single adults in this country than there have ever been? A day and age when there are more single-parent households than there have ever been. A day and age when people say, I feel a deeper loneliness than I've ever known before. The question is an important one. Does this church have a big front porch? I got to wondering even what Jesus might have to say about this. And he does have something to say. It's something that's not the most comfortable reality, maybe not what you quite expect. I want to read it to you from Matthew's Gospel, the 12th chapter, Matthew chapter 12. It's an incident that is important enough that it is reported in 3 of the Gospels, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. We're going to read Matthew's telling of it. Here, we come out of a context where there have been some people who have been opposing Jesus, and they have been so deeply opposed to him that they have been suggesting that the work he is carrying forward actually has its genesis in the heart of Beelzebub. They're suggesting that his work is Satan-inspired. Jesus has some very pointed words to speak to them. As he comes out of that conversation, then this incident occurs. Jesus' words are rather stunning here. Matthew chapter 12, we begin reading in verse 46. It says, while Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside wanting to speak to him. Someone told him, your mother and brothers are standing outside waiting to speak to you. He replied to them, who is my mother? And who are my brothers? Pointing to his disciples, he said, here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven, for whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother. Those are startling, stunning words. If I paraphrased the incident, I would paraphrase it something like this. Jesus is in the middle of teaching. Somebody interrupts him and says, Jesus, your family is here. They want to talk to you. And Jesus says, wait a minute. My family is not made up of those just here in this kitchen or in that living room or even in that garage. The truth is, my family is out on the front porch, in the front yard, in the front street, and all over this town. All of those who are related to me, not by normal natural blood ties, but by the blood ties of Calvary. That's my family. Now, that's a bit jarring. We live in a world when we value nuclear family or whatever kind of family we have. This is important to us. We are told, even by us, by those of us who are Christian teachers, we are told God first, family next, then church and profession and all the other things. And here we come listening to Jesus, and he says, wait, just a minute. Because the truth is, it's not just the biological ties that make up my family, it is the faith ties. Anyone who does the will of my Father in heaven, that is a member of my family. And I will not show preference based on biology. Wow. As stunning as that is in our world, imagine what it was like in the world of Jesus. After all, the work of God up to this point in time had been bound by family. It had begun all the way back there in the dim and distant past when God said to a man named Abraham, Come, I want to do something through you for the world. You are going to have a family that is so large you will never be able to number it all. But through your family, all nations of the earth will be blessed. But then came a problem. Because when Jesus came, it was his Abrahamic family that rejected him. And at that point, Jesus says, then I will enlarge the circle of my family, and I'm going to change the name of my family. Now the name of my family will be different. Here's how the last name of that family is pronounced in the original, ecclesia. We say it, church. Now he says, church is first family. I want you to ponder for just a moment the meaning of that by reading the words of Rodney Clapp, who writes a book called Families at the Crossroads. Listen to what he has to say about these themes. Recovering the purpose of Christian family on the distinctive terms of the Christian story requires two declarations, one negative, one positive. You ready for this? The negative declaration. The family is not God's most important institution on earth. Whoa, wait a minute, Rodney. That's pretty stiff medicine. He continues, the family is not the social agent that most significantly shapes and forms the character of Christians. The family is not the primary vehicle of God's grace and salvation for a waiting, desperate world. As I read those, I'm saying, whoa, wait a minute. What are you talking about? Family is utterly significant and important. Well, that's his negative declaration. Here, the positive. The positive declaration, says Clapp, is this: the church is God's most important institution on earth. The church is the social agent that most significantly shapes and forms the character of Christians. And the church is the primary vehicle of God's grace and salvation for a waiting, desperate world. Please understand, Clapp is not writing against the family. He's not suggesting that family ties are unimportant or ought to dissolve. Not at all. He is merely saying, when we belong to Christ, our family circle enlarges. We become the ecclesia, the church, and that gathering of people is a gathering in which all can belong and all are equally related to Jesus. In other words, in this family, no one ought to feel pushed off the front porch or feel that they don't belong. Or can you imagine this? Experience the feeling of loneliness. Can you imagine the implications of that? Think about what it means for the Loma Linda University Church. The Loma Linda University Church is a mega church. Now, maybe you say to me, Randy, that sounds like it's overstating the case. A mega church, that sounds much bigger. Wait a minute. You can look it up. You can Google it. There are different experts in such things who disagree slightly, but they're fairly well agreed. On the low end, they say a mega church is any church that has a weekend attendance at its services of 2,000 or more. Others will say on the higher end, a mega church is any church that has 2,500 or more in its weekend services. On either count, this church qualifies for that, almost double that. It is a mega church. Now that brings with it some great blessings. It brings with it enough people having gathered together to have the resources to do some things that a smaller church may not be able to do. And for those things, we are deeply grateful. But it also brings challenges. And you know the challenges. The challenges are that you can walk away saying, if I hadn't gone today, no one would have missed me. I would not have been one that people said, where was so-and-so today? We ought to call her. We ought to check on him, see how they're doing. You can feel like you could just become a number, a person in a pew. You appear, you disappear, and nobody cares. It is possible in a larger church for that to occur. Now, I realize, your pastoral staff realizes that there are people who come here for that very reason, who want to be anonymous, who want to slip in and slip out. We welcome you as well. But there are many who come desiring connection, connectedness. And the question that presses in upon us is, how big is our front porch? Is our front porch big enough that we say, you belong as well? This is where life happens. We are in this together. How big is our front porch? It's an important question because in the absence of that, people go elsewhere. I read an excerpt from a book this week. Interesting enough, I thought I've got to read that book. A book called Bad Religion, written by an author named Ross Douthat. Here's what Douthat has to say. He starts out by quoting a philosopher. Listen to Douthat's words. As the philosopher Ronald Dworkin pointed out, the United States has witnessed a 100-fold increase. Did you hear that? Has witnessed a 100-fold increase in the number of professional caregivers since 1950. Our society now boasts 77,000 clinical psychologists, 192,000 clinical social workers, 105,000 mental health counselors, 50,000 marriage and family therapists, 17,000 nurse psychotherapists, 30,000 life coaches, and hundreds of thousands of non-clinical social workers and substance abuse counselors as well. Most of these professionals spend their days helping people cope with, you ready for this? Cope with everyday life problems. Not true mental illness, everyday life problems. This means that under our very noses, a revolution has occurred in the personal dimension of life such that millions of Americans must now pay professionals to listen to their everyday life problems. Duthot concludes, the result is a nation where gurus and therapists have filled the roles once occupied by spouses and friends. In other words, they now fill the roles that once took place on the front porch. In the front porch swing, the front porch rocking chair, on the summer evening, where long, lingering, slow conversations can take place, where life is shared, where neighbors come over, where people drink lemonade, it has been replaced by professionals whom we pay to hear us. Into that void comes the church. The church, which Jesus said is my family. Every one of you, he says, who has named my name, who has accepted my grace, who is bound to me by the blood ties of Calvary, your family. And in this family circle, all belong. All can matter. Powerful words. Now, it's not always easy. As any member of any family knows, sometimes the conversation gets pretty straight and pretty direct. That's necessary in a family. I want to give you just one example of that. It's actually the scripture reading that was read this morning by Steve and Caitlin Brooks. It's out of 1 Corinthians chapter 4. I just want you to listen to it. I want you, as you hear these words, to think of what image, what familial image, what relationship image comes to mind for you. This is Paul writing to his church, to his family in Corinth. 1 Corinthians 4, I read beginning with verse 14. He writes this, I'm writing this not to shame you, but to warn you, as my dear children. Even if you had 10,000 guardians in Christ, you do not have many fathers, for in Christ Jesus I became your father through the gospel. Therefore, I urge you to imitate me. For this reason I have sent to you Timothy, my son whom I love, who is faithful in the Lord. He will remind you of my way of life in Christ Jesus, which agrees with what I teach everywhere in every church. Some of you have become arrogant, as if I were not coming to you. But I will come to you very soon, if the Lord is willing, and then I will find out not only how these arrogant people are talking, but what power they have. For the kingdom of God is not a matter of talk, but of power. What do you prefer? Shall I come to you with a rod of discipline, or shall I come in love and with a gentle spirit? I want to ask you, as you listen to those words, what relational image appeared in your mind? I'll tell you exactly what it was for me. It comes out of the word Paul uses in this. It's a father talking straight to his kids. It's a father saying, wait a minute, I hear things that I don't like. It's time for us to have a conversation. It's time for me to set some things straight. That's what comes out of it. It's almost the kind of thing that mom might say, just wait till your father gets home. That's exactly what Paul says. He says, I'm coming to you, and when I get there, I don't want to find the room a mess. That's family talk. That's church talk. We can't make the mistake of thinking that if we as a church are family, that it will all be easy or it will all be gentle conversation. Sometimes families have conflict, but when they have conflict, when we have conflict, we stick together long enough to resolve it. That's family. Difference doesn't threaten the fabric of the family. Jesus said, it's not just mom and the brothers out there who are related to me. It's everyone who does the will of my. It's the church. That's my family. So the question persists. How big is our front porch? Can people be swept into our embrace and become part of the family? What about it? I want to ask if you would be willing. I want to ask if you would consider doing 3 things, not just today, not just next Sabbath, not just camp meeting, but making them an enduring part of the tradition of the Loma Linda University Church. If you want to enlarge our front porch so that more can be a part of our community, a part of our family, consider these 3 things. They all grow out of what we do at home when guests come over. The first thing is welcome. We welcome them. You saw the video today. Part of the reason we laughed and kind of pulled back a bit is he wasn't willing to welcome, wasn't willing to open the door and say welcome. That's what we do. Somebody, a friend, a neighbor rings the doorbell. We open the door. We say welcome. How are you? Come inside. We engage them in conversation. We smile. We shake their hand. We ask them how they're doing. That's normal, courteous behavior that we conduct at home. What about at church? What if every person here made that commitment? As I walk onto the grounds of my Loma Linda University Church family, I will be a welcoming individual. I'll smile. I'll greet where appropriate. I'll shake hands. Inside, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh, I'm scared to do it. It's such a big church. I may say, welcome. We're so glad you're here. Are you visiting today? They say, well, not exactly. I've been a member here 23 years. You say, oh, my goodness. I don't want to be scared. I don't want to be embarrassed. I'm scared to say anything. Could I suggest it's better to be wrong than to be cold? Take a risk. Welcome. Speak. Smile. Engage. That broadens the porch. But secondly, at home, there's another reality in which we engage. We not only welcome people, we listen. We listen. We say, come in, have a seat on the couch. How are you doing? What's been going on in your life? By the way, how's your aunt doing? I remember she was struggling with, how are your kids? Are they both in, oh my goodness, they're already college age? And we listen. We listen as people share their lives, their experiences, their world. We are ready to hear what they have to say. And then we come to church, and it gets a lot harder. I've concluded that when we come to church, it's like getting on an airline flight. We scoot in, we sit next to these people, and we're thinking, oh, please don't let them talk to me. Please don't let them talk. If they say hi, then I have to say hi. Then we're, oh, how am I going to get out of this? We don't want to talk to them. We sit in, as it were, strap on our seatbelt, put in our earbuds, and now we're ready to worship. Are you willing to step beyond that? To stick out a hand, shake a hand. Say, how are you? What was your name again? I know I've seen you around. You may have been here a long time. I don't know. But help me with your name. Tell me a bit about your family. What do you do? And listen. Hear them. It could be that not just before, but maybe even after church, a friendship might be forged. A relationship might be born. It's what we do at home, on our front porch. We welcome. We listen. And the third one, we linger. We linger. Some churches, you've probably attended such, this is not one of them. Some churches, when the postlude ends, it's like a fire drill. People heading for the exit. Zoom. They're all gone, cleared out. 3 minutes later, we can pick up the trash and go home for lunch. Hopefully, that's not this church. Because what happens at home? What happens at home is you linger. You sit at the dinner table and you eat. You want some dessert? Oh, I couldn't have any dessert. Well, let's wait a while. We talk. Half hour, 45 minutes later, dessert comes out. We eat the dessert, at least part of it. We get done. We're playing with our food. We're still talking. Somebody finally says, you know, the chairs are a lot softer in the living room. Oh, yeah, that's right. So we go up, move to the living room, plop down there, and we talk, and we linger. Finally, somebody says, you know what? We got to go. I say, go? You just got here. No, we got to go. Don't run off yet. And pretty soon we're standing in the entryway. Don't go yet. We're still talking out on the front porch, out to the car. And finally, as they drive away, friends, we have lingered. What about church? I want to suggest to you that the health of a church family can be fairly accurately told by how many people linger and how long. After the worship service, after the Sabbath school class, after the program, after the Christmas concert, how long do people linger and talk and share life? 3 things. If we want to have a large, a welcoming front porch, welcome, listen, linger. Now, Anita and I became members of this church, the Loma Linda University Church, years before I became part of the pastoral staff. Anita and I joined this church in 1987. We were 10 years old. That was a joke. We joined this church. We moved to Loma Linda, California, and we knew almost no one. We'd heard about Loma Linda much of our lives. We didn't know many people at all out here. Things were large and big. We came to the university church, and we decided this is going to be our church home. We started out sitting in the back there. In fact, later, when Austin was just a little crumb cruncher, I remember sitting on the back row right back there. We joined this church, and we became a part of its fellowship. And something interesting happened here. People welcomed us. People listened to us. People lingered with us. And somehow, I cannot tell you the day, I cannot even tell you the year, but somehow along the path, we woke up one day and this was home. Family. We belonged on a big front porch. I don't know if it was in the early days when people greeted us, when pastors were kind enough to reach out. I don't know if it was later when we had our kids and we were beginning to work our way through the young Sabbath schools. I can't point to a specific moment in time, but what I can tell you is this. Somewhere along that journey, friendships were born that have become more precious to us than life. Lifelong friendships now. From the point they began, only the grave will bring them to an end. Friendships with whom we share life, experience, children's growing up, tears when they leave. Friendships that grew out of church as family. Because people were willing to welcome, to listen, to linger. I guess that's my question for you today. What's the size of your front porch at home? We cannot really be Christian homes with small front porches. But even more important today, what is the size of our church's front porch? What about it? You know, I have this sneaking suspicion, theologically informed sneaking suspicion, if there can be such a thing. I have this sneaking suspicion that if Jesus were here in the flesh and were to tell us about that incident, which we read in Matthew's gospel, that he might say something like this. He might say, "This is my family, all those who are related to me by the blood ties of Calvary. This is my family. I want my family to have a big front porch because I then want to invite my family to follow me into the world, to all other kinds of homes, and invite them to become a part of church. Church as first family." So says Jesus, you need a big front porch.